Good morning, committee, and good morning, guests. Good to see you this morning. It's Thursday, March 2nd. And stop snowing. So that's all positive stuff. Spring's just around the corner. So anyways, this morning we'd like to hear from the Animal Cruelty Investigation Advisory Board in regards to some issues that you had to deal with, and I guess issues that maybe you're still dealing with, according to the press, or the baby goat issue. So, Kristen, are you going to lead off, or?
Sure, Senator Starr, I'm happy to lead off. For the record, my name is Kristen Haas, State Veterinarian with the Agency of Agriculture and a member of the Animal Cruelty Investigations Advisory Board. I represent the agency on that board. And my start off is going to be very brief because I actually am going to pretty quickly turn it over to the board leadership, who you have here and are accompanying me this morning. So I am happy to answer questions that might be Agency of Ag specific questions or chime in on information pertaining to the board. But I think you're in great hands with Erica and Sally. So if it's okay with you, Senator, I will shift it over to Erica for an introduction and then to proceed with an overview of the board's duties, if that's all right.
Yeah, and I didn't do it, but we usually have the committee introduce themselves, so you'll have some idea where the members are from. So we'll do that, Erica, before you get started. So.
Yep. Good morning, Brian Collimore from the Rutland District.
Good morning, Brian Campion, Bennington District. Rich Westman, the Whale District.
And I'm Bobby Starr from Orleans County. We also have Senator Weiner from southern Franklin County and northern Essex County, but she's having trouble getting online, getting on Zoom this morning. So, but she'll be with us on the screen shortly. So welcome, and we're good to go, Erica.
Thank you. Thank you very much for asking us to join you today and giving us an opportunity to talk with you about the ACIAB and our work. And I appreciate all of your time. And thank you for your service to Vermont. I am Erica Holm. I am one of the co-executive directors at Central Vermont Humane Society in East Montpelier. And as that name indicates, we are a humane society shelter that cares for companion animals in need and helps to find them new homes. So I am on the board, have been on this board since its inception, and just recently stepped into the chair role this past month. And so what we thought we would do today, I'm going to let Sally, of course, speak and introduce herself, but then we thought we maybe would sort of take a step back a little bit and give you folks a background, a history of the ACIAB, how we came to be and what type of work we're doing. Because I understand that there are many new folks in our legislature this year, and it's a great opportunity to let people know what's going on and refresh some of the memories of those of you that have been here. Because I do understand there's lots of committees doing work for the legislature, and we want to just let you know what we're doing for you. So Sally, would you like to introduce yourself, and then we can go from there?
Sure. Thanks, Erica. So good morning. And again, thank you for having us. It's a pleasure to be here, and we really appreciate you giving us some time this morning to chat with you all. My name is Sally Adams, and I am the Chief Deputy State's Attorney in Chittenden County. I am vice chair of the Animal Cruelty Investigations Advisory Board and have served on the board as the state's attorneys and sheriff's representative since, I believe, 2018. I've been vice chair for the last 3 or so years, maybe a little bit longer than that. My role on the board is to represent prosecutors and law enforcement in these matters. We do have other representatives from law enforcement, but I specifically represent the sheriffs who do the countywide investigations in some of these cases.
Great, thank you. So, excuse me. I have been battling a Vermont chest cold since February 1st, so forgive me if I sound raspy. So I thought we would, as part of a little bit of the history lesson, go back to, how we came to be. Is at the request of the Vermont legislature and the bills that you folks passed to put us in place. Initially in 2015, there was a bill to create the Vermont Animal Cruelty Task Force, which then was charged with taking a look at the animal cruelty process throughout the state, what needed work, the laws, the procedures, etc. And they produced a report in January of 2016. And one of, out of the many recommendations in that report, one of the recommendations was to create this board, the Animal Cruelty Investigation Advisory Board. And so we were created from Act 155 out of H533. And the board is made up of folks from many different aspects of the state that are involved in animal cruelty response and investigation, so that we have really a varied input covering all topics. And that's one of the things that I just find incredibly valuable about this organization, this board, is that, we all come at this animal welfare concern with our own perspective. And it's really great to be working with folks that have a different perspective, and especially helping to keep in mind and hear from. We've got people on this board that come from many of the various state agencies, such as AG, that have a stake in this, and also can really help the rest of us to understand what their role currently is, what their limitations are, that type of thing. So it's really a very positive board in terms of the people that are on it and the roles that they come from. So we have produced reports every year since our inception. And we started out tackling sort of bullet points. There was many, I think there was 13 possibly, I'd have to look specifically, tasks assigned to us to look at a really wide range of topics, such as, funding, training, protocols, agencies to involve. And so they're kind of all over the place. So we had to, as a board, figure out how do we sort of cohesively bring this together and tackle what is a huge need in Vermont, because there are some very large gaps in our protection of animals in our state. And you mentioned the goat situation, and people, that has highlighted some of the huge gaps. mostly just in finding where to report and to get help. So as we would work on, 1 to 3 sort of bullets out of the act for ourselves, we would, open cans of worms and find bigger problems, or not that they're bigger problems, but that in order to address what was in the act, there were other things we needed to solve. And so we have tried to tackle those in a cohesive manner and provide reports to the legislature every January. Excuse me. And there has been some legislation that has come out of our recommendations and subsequent bills that were written. But there's been some frustration on our part and the public's on how slowly things are moving forward. And then, of course, the pandemic changed everything. And there was recently the sort of changes to the Department of Public Safety and who was handling what, bringing in Fish and Wildlife to help with animal cruelty investigations, and a request for a broader look at who should be handling animal welfare. And there's the resulting report from Wilda White on behalf of the Department of Public Service. So that's Act 147, Section 38 from H 729. And I'm sure most of you are well aware of that. And so we would like to start some conversations to be looking at that report. We're still digesting it. Many of the points in the report, much of the data was pulled from going back to the task force I mentioned from 2015-16, from their recommendations, from our subsequent recommendations. Much of that is in this report, and along with a whole host of other information. So we, as a board, will be talking about that and looking at what helpful recommendations that we can make. There are other interested parties around the state who are looking at this. The Vermont Humane Federation is very interested in helping to move some legislation forward. And we understand, obviously, that this session is not where that's going to happen, but we were very pleased that you would speak with us and start engaging in conversation so that we can get the ball rolling to have some legislation next year. That's my little 2-minute, probably longer than 2 minutes because I can talk, spiel. And we wanted to just primarily open it to you folks to ask us questions and learn more about us, and let us know where you have questions and gaps, and if we can help fill that in for you.
Well, thank you, Erica. That was very helpful. One of the, and perhaps the biggest issue that I saw that came out of that quote goat situation was that it didn't seem like there was an entity in the state that had jurisdiction over the issue. The humane societies kind of didn't have any role to play. I'm not sure whether the advisory board that you guys belong to, the Agency of Ag, it seemed like there was no one place for people to go to highlight the problem here. And I don't know whether you have ideas about possible language that we could have that would help. And that's probably a question for Dr. Haas as well. But that's what I got out of reading the press reports. I have not read the report that you referenced, but this seems to be an issue anyway, that there's a bunch of entities out there, but nobody took hold of this and said, we're going to take this issue and fix it.
Senator Collins, I'm happy to try to chime in on that. I think that this case it's an unfortunate situation that so aptly addresses or shows the issues in animal cruelty response in the state.
Yeah.
And what you have is animals who are being raised for food purposes. So they fall under the purview of the Agency of Agriculture. But individuals believe that those animals are subject to the animal cruelty criminal statutes and want somebody to investigate. And currently under our statute, that investigation falls to humane officers who are law enforcement officers or municipal employees who have been gone through animal cruelty training. Now, I can tell you as somebody who works with law enforcement on a daily basis that if they get a call about goats on a farm in Charlotte, they are going to tell you that they have better things to do and are not going to go. And if you can find somebody who will go, who in this particular case we found a VSP trooper who was willing to go. He did not have any idea what he was doing, what he was looking for, what he needed to do, and what the issues were. And the statute requires that humane officers consult with the Agency of Agriculture on any case involving livestock or husbandry practices. So the agency was contacted, and they, my experience in those particular cases is that you really defer to the agency because law enforcement officers and prosecutors and members of humane societies don't necessarily understand those issues. They're used to dealing with companion animals and not livestock. And so I think that's one issue, is that we have these statutes that cover both companion animals and in certain circumstances, livestock. And it gets those lines get crossed and it gets very blurred. And then at that point, people start to say, well, I don't know about that. And I don't know about that. So I'm not dealing with it. And this is the issue for somebody else to deal with it, which is exactly what you said. Everybody said, this is somebody else's problem. And then I think, the additional issue is that there's the response is if somebody does an investigation and does an investigation well and makes a determination that something needs to be done, there's not any sort of infrastructure in place to then deal with the animals or deal with the situation. Those goats could not go to Erica's shop at the Central Vermont Humane Society. They could not go to the Chittenden County Humane Society. So there's these issues of, well, what do we do with these animals once we determine that there's an issue? And that's not necessarily an issue in this case where we're talking about goats that were being raised for food purposes. That also happens in cases where you have horses that are companion animals, where you have dogs at these large scale operations. It's a drain on the entire system to figure out, okay, what do we do now? And, I think it's just human nature. When somebody's confronted with a big problem, they say, not my problem, somebody else's problem, because the problem is too overwhelming to figure out how they're going to fix it. And so I think that was really what happened here, is that people just did not know what to do. And there wasn't one particular agency or organization that had the legislative mandate to do that. And I think that's one of the things that we really support as a board of the report that came out of the Will DeWhite's report that just came out, is that the recommendation for there to be one agency, one department that is responsible for this, so that people do know that if they have an issue, that's where they go. I don't think it's going to solve all the problems, but I think that it's certainly a start.
And trust me, I didn't mean to assign blame in any direction either. I think your group and the Agency of Ag do a tremendous job for us. And you're right, Sally, it highlighted the problem probably better than anything else I can imagine. It was just one of those very bad situations. And the optics for the general public were very bad, because it didn't seem like we had a plan in place to fix it. So I think the rest of the committee is hopeful that we'll get language. And I'm not a big fan of growing state government either. I don't think we need to create a new entity to handle this, but I think there should be a clear path. If something's not working properly, this is where you go. These are the people that can help.
So
Yes. Thank you.
Have you folks, have you made a recommendation of where that new authority should sit? Have you talked about that, and given it thought?
Well, so looking back through the reports that we have submitted over the years, last night as I was reading them, going as far back as the original Cruelty Advisory Board in 2015, the recommendation at that time was the Department of Public Safety. And I think generally we lean toward that. A couple of times we've also suggested the Department of Health. One of the reasons we lean toward the Department of Public Safety is that there are statutes in place that animal cruelty is a criminal act. And so it needs to belong, or at least strongly involve, our public safety department for investigation and prosecution. We one year recommended the Department of Health when we had spent a lot of time working on the problem of unregulated rescues and transport of animals into our state from out of state. And that is growing dramatically. And
Sorry, Chair, do you mind would you just repeat that part? The transport of animals, which way?
into Vermont from out of
Got it.
state.
Okay, thank you. very much.
And
Sorry, I missed it.
while there are shelters like Central Vermont Humane Society, who we do have some partners we work with out of state and will occasionally bring animals to our area if we happen to have space, there are rescues that primarily that's all they do, right? They don't take in local animals, they just transport animals. There are organizations that don't even really have a presence in Vermont, and they send animals here. And they're picked up in, rest areas in Brattleboro. And
They dropped off, or they meet up with somebody else that takes them? And then what do they do with them? Or is that even legal to do that?
it is legal. And in many of those cases, it's private people who have found an animal online that they want to adopt, and it's in Kentucky and gets transported up here, and they pick them up at a rest stop. Sometimes there may be a local rescue, usually foster based, who will pick up some animals and disperse them out to their fosters. And there's a number of issues besides the concerns we have with the health of the animals coming into the state. We also have seen a huge increase in dogs coming into Vermont with really major behavioral problems and aggression. And then the local shelters are being called to take these animals because they've just bitten their new families in the face. Wow. Local trainers are overwhelmed with requests for help with these dogs that are, fearful, practically feral or aggressive. So it's a huge need that really only expanded during the pandemic as people were looking to get animals to spend time in their homes with them while they were sequestered. And that caused us to really take a long, hard look at the lack of regulation for shelters and rescues, and the health concerns for the animals and therefore the people adopting these animals. And so also resulted in a recommendation that the Department of Health be considered as a place for the animal welfare organization to reside. I understand your desire not to grow government, but what we have also found over the years is this patchwork, and you'll hear that expression often, has not worked. It hasn't worked in the fact that there's no clear path for people to follow, but it also hasn't worked in the lack of understanding of our laws, the ability to tighten up our laws, regulation of organizations that have, didn't exist until recently, like this whole transport thing was so tiny until the past 3 to 5 years.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
And our blue sky report wished that, there could be one organization we submitted back in October of 2019, really was understanding that there needs to be something really comprehensive to get a hold of this and get control of this and have it so people aren't feeling like I need to hand this off because I don't know enough, because everybody's dropping it like a hot potato.
Well, it's a rough subject to handle, really. And I guess it's multitasking, it isn't just go pick the animal up, what do you do with it? You've got to have a place to house that animal and so do you have centers where these animals can be taken, people that volunteer to take them? Because we don't have like in humans, we have jails we can put people in, but animals, what do you do with them once you have who cares for them?
So that, thank you. That's a very valid and important question. So when there are small individual cases, somebody with 4 dogs that are in poor condition and animal control and possibly law enforcement have gone out there, and the local humane societies have historically been the ones to take these animals in and care for them while it goes through the court system. We are small nonprofit organizations that are not adequately funded to be taking in animals as evidence, and that is what they are. So we have to hold them until a ruling is made, either in the criminal case or it can go in parallel, a civil case to make a decision about ownership of the animals, which will allow us to then adopt them out if it's granted to us. But what we're seeing more and more, and just to make a point, that happened to Franklin County Humane Society a number of years ago. I think that they had 7 or 9 dogs that they took in a case, and it essentially bankrupted them because they were holding those dogs for over a year, that they now didn't have the kennel space to help other dogs. They didn't have the staffing to work with the other animals because they had to care for these dogs and couldn't do anything about it. In larger cases, such as the case that happened in Eden, that was 90 dogs. Nobody is equipped. No one organization is equipped to handle 90 dogs. The shelters around Vermont and New Hampshire all stepped up to take in these dogs. Luckily, Ann Ward, who was our director of operations at CVHS at the time and was working with the state police, even though Eden is outside of our area, she had convinced the rescuer to surrender the animals to us. So we were able to give them treatment immediately and adopt them into homes. So there wasn't this long drawn out process for the animals while it went through the courts. But that's not always the case. And, we have some rescues in the state right now that we're very concerned about the care that they're providing the animals. And some of them have 75 dogs on their property. And so if there is a seizure and they refuse to surrender, then there is no place for those animals to go. CVHS, I don't have kennel space at the moment. We have a huge amount of local dogs being surrendered to us. Often Humane Society of the United States is willing to step in and help, and will set up an emergency shelter. I helped out at some of those down south when they did some seizures of dog fighting dogs. And they will bring in people to care for the animals. They did this in Wolfboro, New Hampshire, when 88 Great Danes were seized and the woman refused to surrender them. And they cared for those dogs for almost 2 years. And of course, the costs went into millions for them to be providing that care, because they were bringing people in from all over the country to volunteer and help care for them. So that is part of the issue, and we only see it getting bigger, not better, if there isn't something done, especially to provide some regulation and oversight to these organizations that have these large quantities of animals living in unfit situations, because nobody's checking on them. There's no regulation. Nobody can go there other than basic statutes of food, shelter, and water and vet care. But they can be living in horrific conditions and still be meeting the statute, barely. But they're also putting unhealthy and dangerous animals into our communities. So we need some regulation there to help prevent these from becoming big issues. Sorry, I could go on and on. I don't know if I really answered your question, other than no, we don't currently have a place for these animals to go, especially, as Sally alluded to, livestock.
Yeah, I was just going to add, and I think maybe Dr. Haas could talk about this, but when you're involved in a case involving a non-companion animal, livestock, the issues are even greater, because one, the transportation of them is that much more difficult if you are seizing and removing them from the property. And a lot of times it involves the Agency of Agriculture using their connections with other individuals in the area who might be able to take 1 or 2 animals in and care for them. There's a lot of times where animals are seized in place, and so they remain on the property, but somebody is responsible for going and caring for them, which is a huge expense to whoever ends up doing that. So it's just the operational logistics of something like this are huge, and require an extreme amount of planning and a lot of coordination between many agencies, many organizations, volunteers, state, local, all you can think of. And so it does become a little overwhelming sometimes for people.
And
Sally,
go ahead, Kristen.
I second everything that Sally and Erica have said. And I would say that to your point, Senator Starr, the original question about where do these animals go? I think that speaks to the potential benefit sometimes of trying, or why sometimes the sheltering in place, or the caring for in place, becomes the option that is pursued, because there isn't a barn in the bottom of 116 State Street across the street from you to put livestock. In some of the cases that Sally alluded to, we have utilized, the agency has utilized, as she said, contacts with, for instance, licensed livestock dealers who might be willing to take livestock, or often it's groups of livestock, and take them out of a person's care who is either unwilling or unable to care for them properly. The challenge we've seen in the past with that is that it, again, my understanding, and Sally can correct me, but my understanding is that these animals, as Erica said, have to be, if there's going to be a prosecution, they have to be documented and then potentially maintained as evidence. And we don't have many livestock dealers who are in the business of buying and selling livestock who are willing to board livestock for an extended period of time. We had a case, or we didn't, there was a case a number of years ago where one of our inspectors ended up becoming the foster parent of a group of pigs for this reason. And he had them, he couldn't send them to the butcher. He was basically babysitting them, and they were nice and healthy and fat and happy by the end of it. But it was all of these cases each have their own set of circumstances, but they are all equally equally challenging on the logistical side. So that's been some of our experience.
Yeah, in most of these cases, is it feed that they're lacking or water or both? And I was wondering, we have the livestock care board, is it? And I was wondering, you know, as you drive around Vermont, and many times you see a lot of round bales sitting out in a field. And, you know, it seems like some of those don't ever get moved. And I would, if there was some kind of a system where people that have feed like that, that's just really rotting away or will be eventually, could donate that to situations on the larger animals, horses, goats, even cattle. You know, it wouldn't be the best of feed, but it would at least be feed. Is there anything like that where you can voluntarily donate and then you can also receive product from the site?
The one resource I'm aware of, and Erica and Sally may be aware of others, but there's a equine hay bank that some Good Samaritans and very caring people started in Vermont. I believe that that's run out of a rescue organization in Dorset, but they coordinate the acquisition of and then the giving of hay on an emergency basis. It's either primarily or solely put in place for the purpose of equine animal welfare. And I see Erica shaking her head. So, and when we have referred people to that in the past, I think one of the things that I've observed in some of those conversations is that sometimes the situations that have occurred that gets things to the point where an animal is being, neglected or maybe considered to be abused, through that neglect, there are issues that don't always resolve with a temporary source of feed, for instance. So these might be issues where someone is under, financial constraints that are more persistent than what they are able to remedy with a short-term solution. We sometimes, I'm aware of some cases being associated with mental health challenges of the owners. That's not an uncommon situation where people can experience some of those challenges, and then the animals are sort of the innocent but affected bystanders of that. So I think those solutions are those kinds of philanthropic efforts are great, and they definitely, I know the hay bank has been utilized multiple times. It just doesn't fix everything, but it helps with some of the things for those who have a temporary setback or are able on the longer term to resume proper care for their animals and just need a little bit of a kind of bridge to get over a bad spot.
Yeah. Brian?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. The situation that you outlined earlier of people finding family pets online and, meeting them halfway or, like you said, getting them dropped off in a parking lot. And then those pets don't turn out to be exactly as described. I'm just thinking, is there a way that we could, legislate or help with that? I can see where then, if you arrive and the dog says it's good with kids, but then it nips at one of the kids, the dog's going to likely end up like, I think Erica said, in an animal shelter or in the Humane Society. So I don't know if you have recommendations on how to deal with that. I know some of those organizations, if there's an umbrella organization, sometimes they come up with agreements that say, you have a 2-week trial. If not, we'll come pick up the animal, those sorts of things. Is there anything we could work to build in so that families have a better idea of what they're getting and just make sure that, again, what they get is sort of what they're expecting, and the animals just aren't turned over to the authorities afterward when something goes wrong.
Yes, thanks for the question. It's a hard thing to legislate, but that's one of the reasons that we felt having some, we did a lot of research and work with the OPR, talking about having the rescues be licensed and regulated, and then having some, guidelines and umbrella regulations and requirements for things such as the rescues who are actually a rescue here in the state. They need to always keep a foster home or two available to take back a dog that's not working out, for example, because right now that's not happening either. Even local rescues are like, oh, I don't have room for that. I've got a transport of 20 dogs coming up. I can't take back your dog. I need you to hang on to it until I have space. Or they're not making appropriate decisions either. They're taking back a dog who has just aggressively attacked a human, and they're not making a euthanasia decision, and they're readopting it. And so there need to be some, guidelines to help with regulation in those areas. The ones that you started out mentioning, so a rescue, not even a rescue, a shelter down south who is desperate to just get their animals out of state because they do euthanize for space and time, and they'll send any animal up. And that's what we found during the pandemic. They were practically emptying their shelters because so many people were looking for animals. And there is no, they're not taking that animal back. There's no way for the person who adopted and received that animal to send them back. They're contacting their local shelter to take the dog. I mean, sometimes within days of receiving this dog. And we don't have the capacity to take on these dogs. And yes, now I guess they're a Vermont dog, but on the other hand, we schedule appointments and work with what we have for space and staffing, and so we can't always take them from them right away. And to be blunt, if a dog has attacked and bitten a person, then that is not an adoptable animal. So we are not going to put dangerous animals into our community. And so for us to take that dog, the conversation we end up having with many of these adopters is that they need to make a euthanasia decision. And they should be doing that with their vet, not putting that on us to do that for them. But in many cases we do. So it would be very hard to have legislation that would regulate and be able to assure that the animals coming into the state are behaviorally sound, without having some type of more specific regulation about there being a receiving organization. And I think that's one of the things we had recommended when looking at the Sunrise application, was that we can't have these organizations that really have no presence in Vermont just sending animals here and essentially dumping them. Sally, you unmuted, so obviously you.
So, yeah, if I could jump in. So the report that was submitted to on January 15th, as a result of, it was from Act 47, Section 38, H 729. The Vermont Department of Public Safety did a report on the unification of animal welfare and related public safety functions. And part of that report, I think it's page, starting on, it's a very long report, but there's a lot of it is appendix information. But page 69 of the report is a plan regarding transportation of domestic animals into the state. And it breaks down what our current existing law is, what the law is in some of the other New England states, and then provides an overview of draft legislation for something like that. And essentially what that report is recommending is that anybody who transports an animal into the state would need to do so by using what I think the report refers to as a sponsoring agency, which would be an organization in Vermont that's in good standing in Vermont that agrees to accept the animal. And then there's a quarantine period, and there's some processes in place for the animal to be assessed for behavioral or medical issues, so that there's not potential diseases that are being introduced in the community. So I think that is certainly legislation that I would encourage this committee to take a look at, and the proposed legislation that's part of that report, because I think that does potentially address your question, Senator, as far as, is there something? And I don't know that it's perfect, but I think that it's certainly a start, and it's a start to the conversation of what could we potentially do to address this issue, so that we're not having a litter of puppies that have parvo being dropped off in a Walmart parking lot in southern Vermont, and then creating health issues for the residents of Vermont.
Could I just ask one? People always talk about all these dogs coming up from down south. What exactly is not happening down there, or what's why? What's the issue? Why are they all coming? Can somebody just help me understand that?
Sure. Well, the biggest thing that's not happening down south is spay and neuter. So some of that is a societal thing against neutering. But also it's financial. So it's, there are larger national organizations, the ASPCA, HSUS, who do spay and neuter programs around the country, try to give grants, even places like PetSmart Foundation, they are really making huge nonprofit organization efforts to help with spay and neuter. It's a different environment down there, of course. Now, in Vermont, and I'm sure you see this on social media, if there's...
I have to say, some people think, because I live in Bennington, I'm from the South, but I don't really know the South.
So that's cute.
You should be living down there with them.
There's a very different environment. If you see a loose dog in Vermont, it is posted on many social media pages within 5 minutes and spread around the state, and the dog is scooped up and brought back home. That's not the way in the South. So partly it's environment, weather. People aren't as concerned because they're not going to freeze to death on normal times. There's just a different attitude about their animals and their pets, and so strays are just common, and they are breeding. And there are, backyard breeders, and people just treat their animals differently, and they dump them at shelters, and they'll dump, a dog will have an oops litter. So the whole litter and the mother get dumped at the shelter. So they're overrun with animals in a way that the Northeast, especially New England, is not. New England has really great spay-neuter programs and spay-neuter attitudes and responses. So we just don't have the same number of unwanted animals that the South and the West Coast have. So, it's really an interesting patchwork in this country of where these problems are. And so transport was looked at as a solution, but the reality is we can't transport our problem nationally. We can't transport our way out of this problem. But it has caused many, many rescues to crop up like mushrooms, because it really inspires people to think that they're saving lives. They're pulling animals from high kill shelters and bringing them here. And they are satisfying a need, because New England has done such a great job spaying and neutering that we don't have as many animals available for people to choose from. So they really do rely on sort of a source from the South.
And I would say based on where some of the health conditions, so there's the behavioral aspects and then also the health issues. I mean, it's probably it used to be more frequent. Now I would say it's on average once every 10 days to 2 weeks, I'll get a call from a veterinarian in Louisiana, Kentucky, South Carolina, any of sort of the south of the Mason-Dixon line saying, hey, we've got this litter of puppies, or we have, and 2 of them have died from parvo, but we need to get the rest of them out of here because, you know, they're gonna die here. And so is it okay? And these are veterinarians asking, so a colleague question, is it okay if we ship them sick? Or is it okay if we ship them with heartworm disease? As long as we write on the paperwork that, by the way, they have heartworm disease. And it's just, they're challenging conversations because there's so much passion and emotion, and it's well intended. And I certainly understand why people would always opt, myself included, to have a dog live rather than not live. But what that sometimes results in is that then we in Vermont accumulate dogs with these, you know, illnesses that are contagious to other animals. So it changes the proportion of healthy versus non-healthy dogs, and it's all based in people's efforts to try and get these animals out of a region of the country where they have a less chance of a good life, and get them into a place where they do. The other thing, just to comment on the transport. One of the loopholes that people have utilized over the years is based in the fact that if someone is bringing their own dog into Vermont, they do not have to meet as many of the what I would consider to be very rudimentary import requirements that we currently have in place. Versus if someone is transporting a dog in that does not belong to them. So when you get these online purchases of dogs, we've had conversations in the past within our agency about what it means if somebody pays a deposit through Pet Finder. For instance, they see a dog online and they send their money through PayPal. Well, does that mean that then when that dog comes into Vermont, it's an owned animal and therefore exempt from the minimal requirements that do exist? So there are shenanigans like that go on as well, and lots of loopholes that people can exploit to worsen the problem for our state.
So if I could, and I don't mean to step away from because there's an emotional attachment to companion animals for sure that, well, maybe they do exist in the livestock world too, I don't know, but
They do.
Okay.
They definitely do.
In the interim, I have reached out on the computer here and begun to read the report from Wilda White, who I think is one of my constituents. I think she lives down in Pulte, at least did at one time. So I thank her for the report. And so I'll talk about this, and I know I made the statement about growing government. But her recommendation, from what I'm seeing, is that inside the Agency of Ag, there would be created a new division of animal welfare with a director and the ability to hire people under that director to sort of do the work. And they would have regulatory authority under Chapter 20 and enforcement authority under Chapter 13 to do a lot of the things that we talked about with, and I don't mean to keep going back to the goat issue, but that, again, I think was a pretty clear issue that we need to address, that we need to sort of do this. So, I don't want to put Dr. Haas on the spot, and I don't mean to put anybody on the spot, really, but I'm wondering what kind of reaction you have to that. Obviously, it's going to be an issue of funding. I mean, doesn't everything in this building always come down to money and the cost and how we're going to fund it, who's going to pay for it? But I'm kind of curious what that might mean in terms of funding. You know, how much the director would run and how many employees would be needed. And if that is indeed the best solution to the problem, and I don't know that it is, but I think it certainly merits discussion.
Yeah, so I can comment on that. We have had conversations within the Agency of Agriculture about this topic, and then specifically about the content of the report. I and Dr. Levine, our Assistant Dr. Levine with Ag, our assistant state veterinarian, met with Wilda several times to provide information to her and context for the report. And so the couple of things that I come away with on that topic are that I do firmly believe that a centralized place, a hub, if you will, for these kinds of activities is appropriate. I think we've demonstrated over decades and over many individual cases as a state that the disjointed municipal-based structure has its challenges. It works in some instances, and then there are others, as have been discussed here, where it just isn't the best way to do things. But I appreciate, Senator Calamore, your comment about the funding. And unfortunately, that is also true. I also firmly believe that this is not a set of duties that it would be any better handled in a particular state entity without dedicated support for it, both personnel and other resources. And as an executive branch agency, we have the governor's budget, and this kind of funding isn't currently in the governor's budget. And so I certainly can't, really deviate from that. But to answer your other question, I think that a lot of, over the years, heard Maine, the state of Maine, used as the example of something that can work well. Our conversations with the Department of Ag in Maine have been numerous as we try to get a better handle on, what does it look like? How does it work for you all? And they, like everybody, have, staffing issues and some vacant positions. But when they are fully staffed for this type of work in that state, they have a veterinarian, they have a director, they have field agents and inspectors and then investigators, and it's anywhere from 8 to 10, maybe up to 12 employees when they are fully staffed. Now, Maine is a bigger state than Vermont, so I'm not suggesting that we would have to duplicate that. But what I am pointing out is that our entire animal health section within the Agency of Agriculture right now consists of 2 veterinarians, myself, Dr. Levine, 3 field staff, and 1 administrative support person. So we're talking about, resources that would have to be significant in order to do this work properly and well, and not just recreate the same problems, but shift them to a different structure, so to speak. But I appreciate Wilda's, definitely appreciate her report, and I think what it does is it opens this conversation that we're doing here. And it's a conversation that definitely needs to be had and to continue. And I think there are lots of great pieces in that and lots of places to, discuss further. So.
Yeah, and I appreciate your comments, Kristen. I don't think ours would be naturally as ambitious as Maine's. I think it takes 2 days to get from the farthest south point to the farthest north point of Maine.
Exactly, yes.
Big state, but still, okay. That's a very good answer. Thank you.
So Senator, if I could just quickly, I do have to jump off. I have a 10 o'clock meeting, but I did just want to say that as far as the report and the recommendation, I think from the Animal Cruelty Investigations Advisory Board standpoint, this is what we have been asking for as long as I've been on the board, and probably even before I was on the board. A unified system, a one place where this is housed. I think from the board's perspective, we don't really care where it's housed as long as it's somewhere. If it's the Agency of Agriculture, then that's where it lands. If it's the Department of Public Safety, that's where it lands. But we just want it to be somewhere, understanding the challenges of creating things within state government, making government bigger, and funding. But so I just wanted to let folks know from the board's perspective that we do support the proposal that Wilda has made in her report about the unification of a system.
Thank you.
Well, it's certainly very clear that the way we are doing it, it's not working. And the other issue that we should talk about maybe a little more is that licensing to import animals. I don't know how we could figure to license the importer, except for they would have to be a Vermont resident that's receiving those animals should have to be licensed. And but how would we police that? That's a whole different issue. Once you require them to have a license, and then they refuse or don't bother to get a license, and the animals are sitting in Brattleboro because the inspector happens to see them, how do you deal with that situation? You've got the animals sitting there, the guy that's supposed to be picking them up with no license. So we gotta think about that more. Maybe you folks have.
So before I sign off, because it's 10, I will just say that I do think that Wilda's report addresses that in her draft legislation that she proposes. So I think if you folks have the opportunity to take a look at that, I think that will answer some of those outstanding questions.
Is that Act 47? Is that what it is?
What
What was that under Act 47?
Yeah,
Okay.
Act 247, section 38.
And I did email the report to Linda, and she said that she would put it on the committee website. So
Okay.
folks have it available.
Great. Thank you very much.
It's 218
Thank you so much.
pages
I'm gonna
long.
sign off. It was very nice to spend some time with you all this morning.
Thank you,
Yes,
Sally.
Thank you. Thank you. Nice to
Thank
see you.
you.
Yeah.
thank you very much. So
And-
Chris, we'll stay in touch. You're kind of in the middle on this, so once we get through that report, we'll be back in contact with you folks.
And just to say, I'd be happy to forward to Linda an email where I pulled together all of the reports that the ACIAB has issued in the past. So she could post those also to your site, so you would have them in one concise place, because when I tried to find them myself on the state legislature site, I found one. So I'd be happy to send Linda that email, and then they would be there for you. So if you'd like to look back over the past years of the reports that we have issued, they are not 212 pages each, I promise you, which
I didn't
is
know
what
you
Will
heard
does.
me.
report is, but you'll see the evolution, and you'll see that we've been asking for a lot of what is in Wilda's report over the years, and so that it's not certainly a new concept, and that those of us that have been on this board on, off, all the various people that have participated have pretty much come to that same conclusion. We really need a centralized, statewide, somehow organization, because I can tell you it's handled very differently town to town, county to county right now, whether it's livestock or companion animals. And that's not fair to our animals or to the people of our state.
Well, thank you very much, Erica, and thank you, Kristen.
Thank you.
We'll get those reports and go from there.
You're gonna tell me where you buy those glasses too, Dr. Haas.
Oh my gosh, they were a Christmas present from my husband, but they were supposed to be my bedside reading glasses, not for use in public. But then I lost my primary glasses, so now these have been brought into circulation. Yeah.
I like-
We've all been there.
And I like his taste, actually. I think they're great.
I think he got them at Gardner's Supply, and I'm sure eventually I will lose these and you'll see some other random wackadoodle looking glasses on my head. Thank you. I will pass along to him your compliment of him.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well, thanks again, and we'll look at this when we come back after next week. We've got one or two other issues, and hopefully we'll have time to get on to this one.
Thank
If
you
it's
so
any-
much for having us.
Thank you.
And if it's any consolation, a lot of the report is appendix material. So it's not actually, substantively over 200 pages. So if that helps encourage you to open it up.
It
then-
does. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for
Very
having us.
much.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Thanks. Have a great day.
Thanks, you too.
I
Bye.
didn't make it sound like I didn't want to read things either. That's our job. Okay.
Well, if you had 10 reports of
Yeah.
250
I know.
pages each,
Yeah.
no, it sounds like it's not that bad.
Interesting problem.
So we should try to get probably a copy of what Maine does.
Yeah.
And
We're gonna
Interesting.
find out what Nate does. Find out, I think this could be better organized. If you, try to shut off all the puppy mills from the south, I request that Louis who sit in the chair.
Who comes in? Or don't? Oh, yeah, that's where, yeah.
you want,
Louis, not actually our dog, but one of the boys that I employ, he's his, and he's a good owner. Most of the problem in this is the owners are terrible.
Yeah, you can't legislate
hey,
responsibility.
oh boy, this is good news.
And-
There
But
he
Louis,
is always.
Louis the
What are
best
you gonna
man
do
and the
for work
smartest dog I've ever met,
tomorrow?
and he was on the chopping block.
That- We're gonna vote
We're
today.
gonna-
Yeah.
Kind of a lot. But he's a great,
How are you
he's the
gonna
smartest
vote?
dog I've ever seen. He-
Well, it depends if I
Um,
listen to what I think or the letters.
I don't seem to get many yeses, I just get no.
Didn't you say you were gonna answer all mine for me?
Well, I'm afraid I can't do that. I would love to.
What, who said you can't? After hours and I'll pay.
Probably the Sergeant Arms told me, no, don't you take on any additional duties. Thanks a
Yeah,
lot.
thank you.
Alright.
Yeah, these people don't know. Can't believe they know what they're talking about. They should be class. I mean,
Still alive.
yeah, I know.
I know, I can.
If anybody watching, you know what remarks mean.
Can I just ask, when they talk about the big animals in this, the places we've had in my area, the biggest trouble is horse.
Oh,
In terms of complaints.
Yeah, we've had others, but the biggest thing is a lot of people that have horses, we had one
I
set,
mean, there are a lot of complaints.
oh God,
They
yes.
run out of hay and.
Or they don't have a coat on a
shelter.
cold day.
And then,
Sometimes they don't need a coat on.
we had one owner that our horses were out for almost 2 years and starving and running all over,
Serious.
all over the village of Jefferson. Yeah, and but, and I don't know where they, because you don't take them to the Humane Society.
No.
And they're kind of, and it's awful.
That's why I was wondering if there were a central location where donors of feed could register in, and then recipients of that need feed would know about it, could call there. And you see these ground bales everywhere, they sit there year after year. Well, hell, most farmers are pretty free-hearted, and if they thought that they could donate a few bales to keep animals alive, I think they would donate or donate some product. And but it sounds like there's only one up in Georgia, one outfit in Georgia that does something like that.
There's a group at Dorset for horses. I've never visited it, but I've heard great things. And I think they also will give grain away or give food, feed away. But
Take a little bit of a break with it.
Yeah, we may as well take a break until 10:30.